Hello. Welcome on behalf of BetterSpaces and Global Women for Wellbeing. We are delighted to be here with you today for part 2 of our series on addressing uncertainty, a better approach to unwanted anxiety, and creating everyday ways to protect our mental health and well-being. We once again are here with the delightful and very talented Caroline Ribeiro-Nelson, who is the head of Free Choices, Diverse Mental Health. She is an experienced executive, psychotherapist, consultant, coach, and trainer who has been working in the fields of mental health and well-being and employee assistance programs, EAPs, for over 25 years. She has headed operational, clinical, and training positions for leading organizations in Germany and the UK, as well as establishing co-operation partnerships in Europe and the US. And she is also a GW4W advisory board member. So we're delighted to have you back.
Thank you, Mim. It's good to be back.
Wonderful. Well, we kind of covered what anxiety is in the first segment and talked through a little bit about mental health versus mental well-being. And so for those of you, if you didn't see the first part, we do encourage you to go back. Just some great tips about how we can do a little bit better and protect our health and well-being moving forward. But today we're going to be talking a little bit more about this intersectionality between the diversity and inclusion initiatives and discussions that are going on in businesses right now, and this direct connection to mental health and well-being, the mental health and well-being of our teams, our managers, our leaders. So we're really excited to be talking about this because that's near and dear to GW4W's heart. And we know that also is something that BetterSpaces is clearly advocating for with everybody out there, all their clients in their network. There is a lot of attention on diversity and inclusion. And frankly, there's been attention in the past. And we've seen a lot of talk, but not necessarily a lot of real substantial steps forward. And one of the key parts of this is that we don't often talk about how this connects to mental health. What should employees and organizations know to start to begin to think about this as an interconnected challenge?
Yeah, no, I think that's such an important question to understand, Mim, because as you said, diversity, equity, inclusion has been put in one box on this side and mental health in this box on this side, and no connection really has been made. But there is a vital connection. I think understanding that connection can really help organizations in planning their mental health and well-being and diversity strategies. And so the connection is that diversity, equity, and inclusion issues impact mental health in terms of the fact that people from diverse backgrounds, women, Black, brown, people with a different sexual identity or orientation, people with a disability, from different religion, different class and age, they experience negative interactions within our society. They experience violence, they experience discrimination, inequity, abuse, and lack of access and support. And this is something that is historical. And these particular interactions of these individuals and groups has a detrimental impact on people's mental health. And we hear about racial trauma when we're looking at the historical progression of mental health and well-being, and how the particular experiences of racism, discrimination, and also slavery has impacted the particular impact of our experience. And this is played out in society today when we see that we have higher levels of Black people within organization, within prison. We see higher levels of mental health problems for Black, Asian, Afro-Caribbeans. We see that women, in comparison to men, have higher levels of the common mental health problems. And we see it in the workplace as well, with the inequalities which are played out and assimilated in the workplace. So when we look at that connection and we say that, oh, racism doesn't exist, or the prejudice doesn't exist, or things are much better now, there's more equality for women, we're having more women in leadership positions, and we're opening up for people with disabilities or from sexual different identities, we're mixing, the different age groups. That is not the reality. The reality is we are still struggling very hard to get to that point where we have truly inclusive workplaces. And the fact that that's been played out in society and within the workplace is impacting people's mental health in terms of the type of mental health issues and problems that we're seeing played out. And so when you're looking at developing a mental health and wellbeing and diversity strategy within your organization, the two are very closely linked. And my sense is that good mental health needs good diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so in looking at how you develop your strategy, it's important then to look at what are the dynamics being played out and who is a part of developing that strategy with you.
That is so important. Who is doing this, right? Who do you have the right people to even build that strategy? And are you getting the right information? I think that is such a key part when we talk about workplace health and well-being and, this connection. That is, can't overemphasize that, because too often I think it's an insular group and well-meaning in many cases. It's not that they don't care. It's that you need to have a place where everybody can look at your demographics. Is everybody being represented in the conversation? And do you actually have the ability to listen and allow for people to truly express where they're coming from? Because I think that, and I know you and I, we've talked about this at GW4W, we've talked about this extensively, that it isn't just enough to have somebody in a seat at a table. Sitting there doesn't mean that they're actually being listened to or heard. And I think that that's, again, it always goes back to opportunity. Like, are you really hearing? Are we opening up that space? And I think that that's where these facilitated conversations are so important within organizations. And to get past the checkbox approach to a lot of this, we're going to have, here it's this month, it's LGBTQ plus month, it's Women's Month, it's Black History Month, it's whatever month it is. But is it really truly moving the dial? And how are you actually measuring those things? But I think it goes back to exactly what you're saying. How do you know what your baseline is if you truly aren't hearing from the different diversity groups within that organization?
Yeah, definitely, Mim. I think it really goes back to the important point you made about whether people are genuinely committed and organizations are genuinely committed to changing their whole culture and challenging the status quo, because that is something that has been ingrained historically within our societies. And we really need to look at how we can transform that in a way where we stop the performative allyship, that we stop tokenism and these tokenistic gestures, which only choose to bar the way in us really looking at what the deeper issues are. It stops us questioning the idea of white supremacy and looking at race and the social construct of race, and the fact that it is something that was created 17th century and has actually trickled down to today, where it has set up a hierarchical system where based on people's skin, on the white skin being at the top level, the black at the bottom, and the different shades in between. And we see this being played out all the time. Until that, we can talk about that, until we can challenge that, we can look at what that means, then we will be very slow in our progress.
100%. It's still mind-blowing. And we see this, it plays out even in Asian cultures where they value lighter skinned women, or in Brazil, or like, we still, it's interesting how different cultural influences just get propagated through marketing, through advertising. And again, I challenge companies that are out there. What messaging are you putting out there? I mean, even simple things like looking at what pictures are you using in your marketing materials, your website. And we are seeing a shift. I mean, definitely. Like it's been interesting just watching, new advertising. And again, it's a baby step forward. But there's also, ageism is something, these intergenerational workforces. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we have aging workforces around the world. And in many cases, there are people that need to or want to continue to work into their 60s, 70s, and even early 80s. I can honestly say my mom is 84, and my mom, she doesn't work full time. I'm not going to tell you that she does, but she still continues to teach. She's had a piano studio since before I was born. And she continues to do that. She continues to garden and drive and do those things. And so there are misconceptions about age. And then there's also, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, you don't know LGBTQ plus, right? If somebody's not identifying that way, there are also disabilities that are not visible disabilities, cognitive differences in the way you process information. There are so many interesting questions to be asked around how do we perceive these people, and what are our own biases. And I think the curiosity about our biases instead of shame or finger pointing. And again, we're not excusing obviously the really, really bad stuff that goes on. But this idea of taking stock of yourself and saying, well, why do I think this way? Like, you don't have to feel, how are you going to change that behavior or really understand where it's coming from? If you can't see yourself as a human being and say, well, I got taught this somewhere along the line, how do I catch myself from falling back into that trap in one way or another? But I think the work that you're doing, Caroline, particularly around this issue, it always goes back to the bigger picture of, when you get that inclusive team and you have all that diversity coming to the table, you open up the floodgates for truly keeping your competitive edge. I mean, it's extraordinary. And that's the other piece for me that we don't talk about enough. This isn't just the right thing to do. This is the smart thing to do for businesses. This actually gives you a better competitive edge. You're going to get the best talent by creating a culture that taps into that just tons and tons of experience, different ways of looking at something. You're going to be able to creatively problem solve a whole lot faster. And yet we still have these barriers. I mean, we still see the numbers just edging up, in some places, and unfortunately in some places actually going backwards. So I won't say what company it is, but I'm going to tell you, everybody out there listening, I'm going to say, this is a cautionary tale, y'all. So so pay attention. There was a company that restructured. And again, we love women in leadership. This is good. Well, the restructuring actually managed to move women backwards in this major organization that goes out and says, we support women. We're working hard. We have a special leadership program for them. But I think this is the other thing that's the real opportunity now. Employees want to see that you're really making a difference, and they are willing to walk away. If you're not actively proving, if you don't have real numbers, just like you do for your stockholders, or, looking at your P&L, your P&L has real numbers. Well, there are ways to measure all of this within an organization. And I would encourage everybody to think about that. And like anything else, if you're struggling with this and saying, well, we want to be doing this, but we really are having problems, this is where you really need to think about who's actually running this, who's helping you move down that path in a meaningful way. So are there any other like
Mhm.
diversity areas that in general that you don't think organizations are paying enough attention to?
I think you mentioned the issue of disability. I think disability is something, Mim, that has been sidelined for a very long time. It's not something that really has been on top of people's agenda in terms of how can the workplace really understand what visible and invisible disabilities
Mhm.
mean and how they impact people. How can we attract, how can we support, how can we build those communities within an inclusive structure that makes us fully inclusive and diverse? Because we know what inclusion is, we know what diversity is. The issue is, how do we get there
Mm-hmm.
realistically? How do we create genuine inclusion? And I think that you really need to involve the people who it impacts. And it's often the people at the top where you have a few people who will say, yeah, they have some brilliant idea or strategy of where they want to go. And they're talking about it, well, we'll do this and we'll do that. But they're actually not talking to the people who it actually impacts. So when you're looking at how do you attract a more diverse group, if we're looking at, for example, disability, how do we create an internal environment which makes it accessible, that makes it healthy, that makes it a place where people with disabilities can perform at their best? And now we're looking at the hybrid situation. How can we make that outside, when they're working remotely, outside of the workplace as well as inside the workplace? And that doesn't just go for people with a disability. I think it goes for all of the diverse sectors in terms of, women, race, religion, all of those different factors. They have particular issues and needs that need to be understood, because those experiences are not only brought into the workplace. People don't take off their diversity and their experience and their identity when they go into the workplace. They take that into the workplace with them. And sometimes the workplace also then perpetuates the difficulties that are outside. And so in looking at making the change, it needs to be a fundamental change within the culture and the status quo of people coming together and listening to each other, asking the difficult questions, asking specific questions, involving people in that process of creating, developing, building their environment, not just for now, but for the long term. We want to build cultures that last and are strong and inclusive and equitable for the long term. We don't want people, is what we're seeing now, leaving, giving up the workplace. Say, it's not working for me, it's not healthy, I'm not happy, not fulfilled, it doesn't meet my needs, and I'm off. I'm either going to start my own business, or I'm going to quit early, or I'm going to travel, I'm going to do something else. This is what we're seeing now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need to develop the real diversity and inclusion and equity within the workplace, and that means involving people and giving them giving them the tools and the means to create the environment. And they need power. They need the power. They need the authority. They need the leadership, and they need the resources. And this is what real and genuine commitment looks like.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point too. And I think about where people fall on the spectrum of introvert, extrovert, which is one, again, I think doesn't get enough play, enough conversation. And you think about that in the dynamics of a team. If you're leading a team, in general, I'm generalizing a little bit here, but introverts often need time to think about something. Yeah. And they'll come back with a great idea. But how often do we go into a team meeting and just, well, I need your idea, I need your idea, I need your idea. And again, it's just one of those nuances that a manager, if you want the best out of your team, just understanding that piece can be incredibly helpful. Who is the person that needs the information before in order to come up with an idea? Who do you want to give time to so that you make sure that they don't feel like they get shut down? There are nuanced little things that happen around some of these things, and those can all be learned. Like those are, that's the thing. It's like, well, I can't do this. Yeah, you probably can. Chances are you can. So it really is interesting. And and again, we did bring up a little bit of the, obviously we're Global Women for Wellbeing, and with women making up more than 50% of the potential global workforce, and that we are still dealing with pay inequity and healthcare inequity and leadership inequity. What do we need to be thinking about when we talk about better gender bridge building? So not just about how we support those women, but how do we create these bridges across the gender arc? What would you recommend?
I think it means that we need to actually involve everyone. It's not just a women's issue. And women need to be able to feel that we're not just a entity that needs to be invested in or supported, but we're actually part of the human race that is one of the most valuable, important, meaningful aspects of the way that we are able to develop in the world. And to give that respect and understanding is really important. So we want to be able to talk with everyone about that, to be inclusive with that. And we also want to be able to look at what are the issues facing women that are holding them back. So we have the issue to do with predominantly responsible for childcare. Predominantly are in terms of their health are not looked after. We have the issue of menopause, which is a taboo topic, which impacts women. These are issues that need to be brought out into the open and talked about, and to be recognized as just a natural part of being who we are, and to look at what are the strategies and support structures that we need to put in place in order to enable women to be able to take a more fully part in our society, but also for them to be fully healthy as well.
Yeah. And those things do tie back to pay equity, because again, if you are getting paid less, you have less resources. You have less resources for retirement. You will have more difficult choices in terms of taking care of your own health. Am I going to pay to go get this test, depending on where you are in the world? And you're right. It's also about challenging. Are you putting yourself last? And are you even able to talk about some of the challenges? But I also look at this through the lens of single female workers and some of the challenges that they face as well. And, so to your point, as we keep saying, get everybody at the table. A single female executive who may have traveled around the world may feel very isolated if she ends up having some type of surgery. Does she have a support system around her? She doesn't have kids that are there, or a husband or a partner, potentially. And so even that, there's some interesting data in the United States, about 20% of top female executives are single. And so if they have an issue, their support system is not quite the same. So it's an opportunity to hold on to talent and think about it through that lens. On the other hand, to your point, you have working female caregivers at every level. Could be a CEO, could be a shift leader, could be that. And they may have children and aging adults that they're caring for. So now they have a double hit. And yes, they may have other support, but the data says chances are the primary caregiver, the real decision maker for each of the pieces of the puzzle, is probably going to be female. And so the opportunity to say, okay, what resources can we put in as an organization to keep that talent here and make sure that they have the support that they need so that they can stay engaged. And again, I always look at this as opportunity and a way to get curious, a way to build better strategy. But I so appreciate that this is not just a female problem. You really need to have the male leadership involved and embrace this as an imperative for helping your company be seen as an employer of choice. So I just love that. So if you were going to wave a magic wand for leaders, if only we could do that, right? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And it's hard. Look, I mean, we have to acknowledge too that if you are leading an organization, at the end of the day, you have to make money. If you don't make money, you can't pay your employees. If you're public, you know, you answer to your stockholders. So we understand that yes, it's very, very challenging, but right now is this amazing opportunity. And so if you had that magic wand, what would you use it for to help leaders do a better job of connecting diversity and inclusion, mental health, gender equity issues? What are some of the key things they should be doing?
Yeah, that magic wand, you're asking a psychotherapist. So I would have to say empathy. You know, empathy is so incredibly important in us being able to understand someone else's perspective. It means imagining yourself in their shoes. It means understanding from their perspective what their challenges are, what their experiences are, what their needs are. And I think that if I could give all leadership a really strong sense of empathy to connect with people who are different to themselves and to really listen to those people, to understand what their experiences are and to learn from them. And then once they've had that learning, put it into practice. You know, change their way of thinking, change their way of behaving, change the structures to then transform it into a culture that allows people, like you were saying earlier, to have that wealth of diversity and experience and opportunity so that we can all grow and develop together.
And have that more inclusive workplace, that more inclusive community. And ultimately, you know, I think that, you know, beautifully said, we don't value the quality of empathy. And yet there's been really interesting research around managing through crisis and change and how this is a key component. I love your focus on this because I don't think of that as a soft skill. I think of it as a necessary skill. If you're truly going to be a decisive leader, a good decision maker, whether or not you have empathy built in may ultimately lead you down one path or another, one that can lead to a sustainable future and a more competitive landscape for your organization, or one that may lead you down the path of being more and more isolated and ultimately lose out on the talent that you need in your workplace. So it's a strength. It's a strength. And it's interesting because I know you do this kind of work too, is that maybe something for your organization to think about, all you and our audience out there. Do you have discussions about empathy? Do you actually practice and real listening, learning skills? And is that built into your management program? So those may be some of the questions you want to be asking internally. We are at time. This is such a rich topic. I'm sure that we could go on and on. So if people want to get in touch with you, Caroline, how would they do that?
Well, they can reach me through my website, www.freechoices.co.uk, or they can connect with me via LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful. Or if you can always reach out to GW4W and we will get you connected to Caroline. Thank you all for being with us today. We hope you've left a few comments. You can always do that on the recording. BetterSpaces always loves to see your thoughts on these topics. And we hope that for each and every one of you that you have a healthier future, that we build this inclusive world together. And we look forward to seeing you again on Better Spaces. Have a great day.